Hi, Ghislaine. How are you doing?
Hi. Uh, my is this another day of
No, we're
part?
gonna do final review today. I posted final review. So let me post an announcement so everybody, I forgot to do the announcement. So give everybody a minute, okay? Okay, let me send it to everyone. And the ones that don't show up will have to do it on their. Yep, everybody's here. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Kevin. How are you? So we're gonna be a little light going into final review. Hi. So we are now in week 13. That gives you 3 weeks before the final. So I want to take this opportunity to provide a review for the overall semester so you can prepare for the final exam. Final exam will be open the week of June 7th, and it's going to close for you um, on the 9th. So you have 2 days and you can take it at any time. I will provide password um, for your final exam, but make sure that you check out the lockdown browser information because I use lockdown for the final. Okay, let's go into screen share. So we are doing the final review today, and then for the lab this week, we're not going to have lab again. So make sure that you work on your final project. I will get your grades updated going into the final. So this week and next week. And so for the final review, you will find it in the module after the project. This is going to be the final review. I will post the video here in case you need to go back and look at it again. Okay, so it'll go up after the session. The final exam, I posted the install lockdown browser information. So if you want, you can check that out. If you already have it installed, you just follow the instructions on how to use the quiz option in Canvas with lockdown browser. So you have to open it to open the quiz, and it will prompt you a password, and I will provide the password for you that week. Okay. So you can take it anytime during those days. It will close at 11:59 on the 9th of June. I will get all your grades ready before the end of the week. And so, and the final will have 50 questions. Okay, so let's go over some of the questions that you will likely see on the final. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so in this review assignment, we are going to cover Unit 1 through 12. Many of the questions you've seen in your assignments, your lab, and also your quiz review. Some of the questions in the later chapters are also added. So make sure that you look at the content from chapter 1 through 12 or unit 1 through 12. So in the first question, it asks you which of the following option is the type of host in the local area network. So make sure that we know the type of systems that will be your server, your PC, your terminal, your kiosk. And terminal is basically a system that's connected to your rack or your appliances, so that way you can manage your appliances. So it is a computer. And then your kiosk You might find this in, retail environment or even automated area like train, planes, etc. So all of the above for number one. Okay, so make sure we know the local area network hosts. For number two, it asks you to select the options that is a type of network components. So you need to know the network appliances and the components so you can have switch router, IPS, IDS, firewall, etc. Now on the test, it might ask you which one is not. So make sure that you know them, um, or which one would be. So you might not see all of the above options on the test. Okay, so make sure we know them. For question 3, it asks you which of the following option is a role of a server, and a server can contain multiple roles. We talked about this in chapter 1. It could have a domain name systems. That would be a domain name like nvc.edu. That's would tie with the web server, so you can host that website. So you would have web. You can have DHCP, which is used for allocating IP addresses automatically, so dynamic IP distribution. Remote access for people who are connecting for work. Print, and print doesn't have to have server operating system. You can use your Windows or your client OS for that. It can be virtualization, and the common one that you see would be vSphere, or you would see your Hyper-V in Windows Microsoft environment. So all of the above for number 3. And it can also use, server can also be for FTP and so on. So we have various areas like authentication, certificates, and so on. In question 4, it asks you what protocol provides reliable transfer data, connection oriented, and requires 3-way handshake. And we know that it is TCP. Transmission control protocol is different than UDP in that it makes sure that there's acknowledgement in the connection, so it's connection oriented, compared to IP, which is connectionless, or UDP. UDP, while it is efficient and it is streamlining in the process of the protocol in communication, is unreliable in that it just sends, and so therefore it doesn't have any form of acknowledgement. So TCP, um, while it is reliable, it is going to take a little bit longer in time, but we are mostly using TCP in our network and our internet. For number 5, what protocol is used for addressing and routing between end nodes? And that will be your IP. So the keyword there will be addressing and routing. And IP is connectionless. It is specifically used for addresses and for routing purposes. So the router functions at the network layer, which requires IP addresses for it to be able to forward packets and in the route that is specified. Okay, and IP addresses could be version 4 or version 6, right? And that is operating at the network layer of the OSI. So as you look at the protocol in networking, you would find that they are allocated or assigned to specific layer for the OSI. So sometimes it's important to think about the services correlated with the OSI layers in networking. For number 6, in this one, it asks you what protocol is used to translate private IP to public IP, and that's what we would refer to network address translation protocol. So from your home network, which is 192.168.x.x, going into the public IP, which is assigned to your internet service provider by organizations. And for North America, we would use IANA. So that would be network address translation protocol that would interpret or translate your traffic from private IP to public IP. And this is also used in cloud environment, right? Where we would be able to subnet our cloud infrastructure and then, or our cloud networks or virtual networks, and then be able to use public IP to receive traffic for a web server, for example. For number 7, it asks you what type of router is an interior router that receives data from the edge router or a gateway via wired connections and sends it to end users, typically via Wi-Fi or physical connections for connecting users or additional routers. And this is often referred to as distribution routers. So when you think about distribution routers, you would think about how it would distribute traffic to the subnetwork or the system in the subnetwork. And we, as the user, would be accessing the subnetwork in the overall local area network. Okay. So, and routers are used to send traffic from one network to another because of the routers and the automated systems, right? Autonomous systems are used to also for traffic or for communication purposes. So they are used to be able to get you to the web pages and the websites that you're accessing from your home via your browser. Okay, so distribution routers are often used internally, where the edge routers is used to connect from one to the next for the network, one network to the next network. And in chapter 1, we have specified different types of routers. So for number 8, it asks you to fill in the blank. And the statement says the servers are generally placed in the central location they are known as main distribution frame, your MDF. Okay. So when you have centralized servers, for example, why would an enterprise need a central set of centralized servers? Well, in a network environment, you would have hierarchical systems that would then replicate data or information to other systems. So for example, you might have a domain name system, which is a server role. And in that, it would have subdomain or child domain, right? That would represent, could be various region in that enterprise or locations, or even companies are affiliated with that organization. And then those type of systems would then be centrally, physically located on the racks of their headquarter offices, or possibly in the data center that would store appliances and equipment for their main operation. And with the DNS, we can include your web servers, your database, and then we would centralize some of the security appliances and your network systems, including your distributed routers. Okay, so those servers are considered to be part of your main distribution frame. And if you're interested in exploring networking, if you haven't taken the 26's classes from RCC, I am teaching CIS30A, where we would go into specifics with different areas of OSI and also protocol and subnetting and all of the good stuff for networking and details, configuring networks, designing networks, and so on. So it would be a good complement to this class. And it is also part of the apprenticeship programs. Okay. For number 9, in networking, what type of models are used for providing standards for end-to-end data communication? Often you would see OSI being referred to or TCP/IP model. TCP/IP models, mostly the common model is 4 layers, and sometimes you would see them referred to as 3 layers TCP/IP model. It combines some of the layers on the OSI into simpler levels. And so why would we need these models? It's going to allow us to standardize the type of communication equipment, appliances, network systems, even network interface cards. And so all of the hardware and the software tools that we're using for networking refer to the OSI and the TCP/IP model for standardization in production, in development, and in use. So that way it's the same across the world, compared to before, long ago, they would be different from one manufacturer to the other. So we had come up with the model so that way manufacturers and provider would use the same tools, technology, and standards, um, design in order to implement what we see as as the overall communication system for the World Wide Web. Okay. And for number 10, it asks you which Python library is used for spawning child applications, controlling them, and responding to the expected patterns in their output, such as automating interactive applications, such as SSH, FTP, Mancoder, passwords, etc. And we had explored pexpect, and the keyword here is expected patterns, right? So we can use pexpect along with other Python libraries, but this one is really at the simplest level on how we would look for specific pattern and be able to automate that based on that type of pattern, such as logins, and so on, passwords, certain things in the terminal. For number 11, asks when programming in Python, what is used to manage separate package installations for different projects by creating a virtual isolated Python installation and installing packages. And you would use Python virtual environment. And it is best to implement this throughout, most of our tasks in this class and also in network and system administration when you're trying to automate processes. Because it's going to be able to keep the organization of your packages under that directory for the virtual environment. We've done this throughout many labs. So you can install it and then you will need to activate it in order to use it. And you can use Python shell directly to be able to write your script, or you can launch or run a program or a script that you have written as a .py file. Okay. And for 12, what command is used to install Python virtual environment in Ubuntu Linux system? What command is used to activate the virtual environment called env? And so first, we would need to do a Python 3 npip install user virtual env. The reason why we use Python 3 in that most Linux releases comes equipped with Python 2. So we want to use Python 3, and then we would use pip install, right? Assuming that you would have the privilege. So here we would install it for that user, and then we would need to activate it. And whatever you name your virtual environment, that will be following the VNV. Okay. Any questions so far before we move on to the next few? Okay. So for 13, true or false, the pexpect method waits for the child application to return a given string. Yes, it's gonna wait as hence the method name expect, right? And it needs to wait for the child application to return a given string. So that's true for 13. We talked about different methods in the chapter for pexpect, right? So in 14, it asks you in pexpect which method writes a string to the child application. So when you want to issue the string to the child application, hence API, right? We would use the send method, send. For question 15, when using pexpect properties, which property will contain all text up to the expected string pattern? That will be before, okay? And that is different than the next question. So that will be containing all the text up to the expected string pattern. So that will be before. And we use this in some program example or script example. For 16, which property of pexpect will allow string that contains a text to be matched by the expected pattern? So that's after, and that's different than before in that for the after property, the string that will contain text to be matched by the expected pattern. Okay, where the other one, it contained all text up to the expected string pattern. Okay, so make sure that we know the difference between before and after property for pexpect. Okay, any question? Let me slow down a little bit. I feel like I'm going too fast. Okay, now keep in mind that we are having 75 questions for the review. You will have 50 questions multiple choice on the final, okay? And then any extra credit that we've earned that we submitted will be included in your overall grade at the end. Okay, I have, and you can, when you look at your grades, those extra credit is not allocated to specific grade property yet, but it will be after I finish all your project and everything that's graded. Then I would then add your extra credit. Okay, for 17, it asks you to refer to the script and the image and answer the questions. It asks you A, which lines in the script run, sorry about the grammar there, run command in the terminal to obtain and display system information. And so that will be your line 9 through 12. So here, when you look at the overall script, we import pexpect. We declare an object called child, and that will be the spawn for SSH with this IP. Then we have the expect method to really look for what password, right? And then it's going to send Raspberry because that would be the default password or the password for that Raspberry Pi. Then for the child, expect, again, we would look for symbols, right? Because in the terminal, you would see this, right, as represented for the next part for the command. And so when it sees that, then it's going to issue or send the string host name. And then we're going to expect new line. So then we're going to print before. So from line 9 through 12, this is when we would obtain and display the information, which is we want to obtain the host name and print, right, the details from that. So that will be line 9 through 12. Okay. For B, it asks you which lines in the script issue commands for logout. And if you look further in the script, that will be your line 15 and 16 in the script. So to log out, we simply would do exit as we had established the SSH. And this process would require that you set up your RSA key and all of that good stuff first, right? For the script to actually officially work. But to exit is when we actually log out. That will be line 15 and 16. Any question? For 18, describe the purpose of the below script. And here you have import Paramico and import cryptography libraries. And we set up an object called SSH client, and it uses SSH client method from Paramico. And so on the line 5, SSH client set missing host key policy, Paramico auto add policy, and that ties to the encryption part of SSH. And then it's going to connect using host name, username that's specified as string in the parameter, and also our password. So the purpose of the script overall, we can summarize it as it uses Paramico library to automate it SSH key for authentication, and it would only work if we install the RSA key prior to running the script. Okay. No, for the final project, Michelle asked if I require a certain library for SSH. No, I don't. You can use, you can have a choice in that, whichever would be easy for you, right? We practiced using some of the beginning libraries when we started this class. So yeah, I'll let you choose. Okay. Good question. For 19, which Python library simplifies network commands and auto detects SSH in low-level network devices by reducing command repetition? And that will be NetMiko. NetMiko works well, especially if you use CLI in your appliances, right? Like Cisco and Juniper and so on. So those appliances often require um, inner command line interface. And so at the low level, you can use NetMiko library to really avoid repeating the same commands, like setting routes, setting up configurations for your appliances, and so on. And it would be efficient for a large network, right? Um, like let's say you're upgrading your network or even expanding your network. When you buy new appliances out of the box, you need to install iOS or um, your Cisco OS in general, right? And you basically use library to automate the API process, configuration process with the API. So NetMiko will be useful in that aspect. Okay. For number 20, um, for 20, let me scoot it up a little bit so it's not cutting off the other one. It asks you to fill in the blank. Code or script is used to enforce network state is known as blank, and that's intent driven networking. So there's an intention in the automation or looking at the status of your network or the state, right? Um, in the current state, in what and our vision or our intent and how we would change that. So that will be part of the intent driven networking. And that is really the core purpose in this class, is really to be able to um, use technology tools and script to really automate the tasks that will be derived or maintain the operation for our networks. So intent driven networking is very common in infrastructure, management in and administration. And so when we say infrastructure, we would think about the overall networks, the systems, the applications, the appliances, the automation process, the development, and so on. So beyond the networking area, you are looking at the overall picture. And so if we can streamline the task and be able to really automate and reduce the manpower, the effort in configuring and managing our systems, that will be useful. So for 20, that will be intent driven networking. For 21, it asks you which of the following option defines an abstract model that describes our network for a data center, campus, or a global wide area network. And that will be your network data model. So the key word here is abstract model. Actually, the keywords are abstract model and data, right? Abstract model that describes the network for the data for a data center, campus, and so on. So in the large scale, you would see different scale of network. And in the large scale, we would see like the wide area network, or it could be a one data center that will be your local area network, or campus that will be, connecting multiple, they could have multiple data center together. Okay. So your network data model really represent how we would abstractly look at your data that's going to be communicating across these these entities or these different areas of your communication system. So A would be the option for 21. For 22, it asks you to identify a data modeling language that is used to model the configuration of devices to complement NetConf protocol, and that will be Yang. Okay, so when we start getting into using some of the library to be able to configure the network appliances using NetConf protocol, right? In the text and also your notes and your assignments, it talks about what type of modeling language would be used and how flexible Yang would be. So YANG. So this modeling language is used for configuration of devices that will work with NetComp protocol. Okay. So Yang for 22. And for 23, when using NX API Developer Sandbox, how do you, how do you convert JSON RPC requests into Python script? And in the sandbox, you have the option to request Python button. Okay. And you would see that sometimes they would change up the UI, but in most cases, you should have an option, whether it's a drop-down menu or a button. You would have the option for your sandbox to request Python script from JSON, right? And you regularly see JSON being incorporated for many areas of like the data part of it. So that's how it's able to really um, store some of the details in the records for systems and so on. And this is widely implemented across, especially for appliances, network appliances. For 24, it asks you to select the option that is used for managing Cisco devices, retrieving information for inventory and network information. And that will be Cisco Meraki controller. Okay. So none of the other options are really valid, right? So in the chapter, one of the chapter, it talks about how you can use Cisco Meraki controller to obtain information about other Cisco systems. And so that way you can track the inventory of your network and the details. And this is important overall because not just to really making sure that we meet audit purposes, right? But we wanted to make sure that we manage our system, making sure that our systems are healthy, making sure that our systems are recognizable on the network, and so on. 25, what command is used to install PIE API module, PYE API, I should say, in Python virtual environment. So once you're in the virtual environment, you can do pip install, right? PIE API. And this was what we talked about, how it would work with appliances that would use API. You can use pip3, yes, right? And I use pip here under the assumption, so yes, you can use pip3 under the assumption that I'm using Python 3 specifically. And even within Python 2, some of the libraries will work and some don't, right? Most of the libraries that we talked about would be working with Python 3. But yeah, you can use pip3. So pip or pip3 would do. Okay. So when it touches on Juniper API and how to work with the API on the appliance OS, right? We can automate that using the module. On 26, it asks you to specify the command that's used to install Arista online script library in Python virtual environment. So we would use pip or pip3 is fine. Pip install JSON RPC lib. And Arista uses this particular module, okay, with its API. So we want to make sure that we install this module for Vista Appliance. For 27 asks you what contains the blueprint of controls of hosts or nodes and consists of SSH key authorization to access hosts and inventory file of host details that is formatted in YAML. And that will be your Ansible playbook. Okay. So in the Ansible playbook, we would have an inventory file that mainly store the configuration of our systems like IP address, host names, groups, and so on. And you can also use roles in Ansible to really control how certain access level would be. And Ansible playbook would use YAML. So it is a blueprint to really control your hosts and your nodes, how it authenticates and authorizes and being used for the automation process. So Ansible playbook for 27. For 28, it asks you to choose the appropriate options where, sorry about this, where variables are used in Ansible. So in Ansible playbook, you would use variable in the inventory file. You would use the overall variables in the overall playbook itself. You would also use variable in files for roles. Okay, like files that you would set up for roles. So that's where the Ansible variables would be implemented. So make sure we know all the options. On 29, it asks you what is used to reference a variable in an Ansible playbook. And you would use Ginger2 template. And Ginger2 is a templating engine, right? That will work with Ansible playbook. So we would use its template to reference a variable. For number 30, it asks you to fill in the blank. A full feature powerful template engine that originated in Python community and it's widely used in Python web framework such as Django and Flask is known as Ginger2. So when we touch on frameworks, we come back to Ginger2. So Ginger2 is just a templating engine, right? It was created to be used with web frameworks. And we later on in the text and also your class, we talked about different types of frameworks. Popular ones. We touch on Flask in this class. For number 30, it presented to you a script, right, in the image, and you are to determine the purpose of the script. Let me make this a little smaller so I can show you some of the later answer. Okay. So it is an Ansible playbook used to create test file.txt in the home directory using touch command. Okay, so Ansible Playbook is very clear in the type of task that you're trying to accomplish, that where you want to locate it and store the information, and which target systems you're trying to use. Okay, so it's very clear in every single line. So make sure that we know how to write an Ansible playbook for our project, and also know how to be able to interpret what's in an Ansible playbook for our final exam. Any question? And I hope to wrap up the entire final review today. So next week, you don't have to be present on Zoom, but you can come in and ask questions if you like for week 14. I will be available. Week 15, we're going to take a week off, right? So you can wrap up your assignments, your project, and get ready for the final in the following week. Okay, so for number 32, what prefix is used to gather information and store results of network devices from a network fact modules in Ansible Playbook? You would use Ansible Net. And I think we did a lab where we would use Ansible Playbook in Ubuntu. You can come back to that, kind of jog your memory. And again, right, using these tools, learning about these tools is useful. If you wanted to put stuff on your resume, make sure that you know them well, okay? Because if you put stuff on your resume, they're going to ask questions about it when you interview for employers. So make sure that you know them well. Practice, okay? You can use virtual machine, you can use cloud environment, okay, to be able to simulate and practice. For 33, refer to the script in the image and describe the purpose of the script. So again, when you see the 3 dashes at the top, you would know that it is Ansible Playbook. And when we create an Ansible Playbook, we would specify its name, right? Network device iOS information. And we can specify the details about our task and also the connectivity or the target systems. So you have all the connected hosts. The connection is going to be through your command line. And the task name would be gathering facts for your module, or using the iOS facts module. And so we have a when statement, and it touches on when we use the when statement, we can specify the condition, right, of when this task is going to take place. So the condition would be when Ansible Network OS would be equal to iOS. So it's looking for, the criteria would be your iOS, right? And we would display. So in the second area here is going to be allowing us to display. So the answer for this would be Ansible Playbook that connects using CLI to obtain information, host name, iOS version of network devices that are running iOS. That will be your Cisco appliances. Okay. I should say obtain and display. Because it has two tasks. One, to obtain the facts. Second is to display the facts. And facts simply represent the configuration, right, for those systems in iOS. For 34, by default, where does Ansible look for group variables to apply all variables to the group? So where does it find the variables to apply them to the group? Okay. It's going to find it in the same directory as the playbook. And by default, right, it's going to look for group vars for the variables that would be applied to the group. Okay, so make sure that we would specify, right, in the file that would be stored within the same directory as our Ansible playbook. Okay, and like I said before, we would use our virtual Python environment and we can run it all right together and organize and so on. For 35, in Ansible, what feature allows you to automatically load vars file, task handlers, and other Ansible artifacts based on the known file structure? That will be Ansible role. Okay, Ansible role. And then you can also use other feature like Vault for encryption and so on. For 36, what Python package can be used to forge or decode packets of a wide number of protocols, sending them on the wire, capture them, match requests and replies, and that is Python Scapy. And we did some practice in Windows or Linux, right? I mainly showed you in Windows, but you could use it in Linux or Mac. And you just have to install Scapy. On 37, it asks you to explain the purpose of the below commands in Linux terminal using Scapy. So you have sudo Scapy that allows you to run Scapy after you install it. And then we have a send method. So send IP DST is 10.0.0.12 and the protocol is ICMP. So we're using ICMP method from Scapy. So in the commands, we would use Scapy to send ICMP packet from a Linux client system to a server. And the destination for that server is 10.0.0.12 using send method. So you would see that send method, it would encapsulate, right, your target destination IP. So in that we would pass the IP, and then in IP we would specify, right, we would define or declare that DST, what is our destination. And then we also need to include what kind of packets that would be. And IP would work with ICMP. They go together because you cannot ping something if you don't have an IP address. Okay, so that's why you see them there in the parameter. Any question with Scapy? Okay, 38, it tells you to look at the script and the image and describe the purpose of the script when it uses Scapy. So when you see line 1, you have the server and the client, okay? And we would use SR method. And in that, very similar to the last question, we would see our destination is defined as 10.0.0.12. We're sending ICMP packets, okay? And with this, what we're doing is also implementing two for loops. One is going to be for the server, and the second one is going to be for the client, and it's going to print for each. So for this, the script, we would say that it would be to send ICMP packet from the client system to the server, which is 10.0.0.12, using Scapy send request function. SR sends for send request, then print the content of the request and response of the client and the server. Okay. So with the for loop, it's able to print out the request and the response of the client and of the server. Okay, any question with 38? Let me make this smaller. Okay. Okay. For 39, again, you're referring to the script and the image, and we are going to describe the purpose of the script when it uses Scapy. So we have M, okay, and M is declared with sniff, okay, so that should give you the hint right there. And we're going to filter HTTP, and we're going to make it 5. We're going to count it 5 packets. And then we are going to use the show method, right? We're going to access the show method through that object. And we have a for loop. And for the for loop, we have for packet in M. It's going to print. So it's going to capture and then display the 5 HTTP packets using Scapy. Okay, and I cut off the Scapy part, assuming that we already have that imported, but so this is just a snippet, it's not the complete. Okay, so it's going to capture 5 HTTP packets, then display okay. So when we sniff, that's when we're going to capture the network traffic. Any question? You can do like, if everything is running smoothly, you can just give me a capture of maybe like a few minutes. Okay. I can't say how many packets in particular because it also depends on the type of services you have on your cloud. So just you can if you want to specify, let's say you can just capture like 50. That will be enough. Okay. But if you run it for a couple minutes, it's also going to capture more than 50 if you have a lot of things running. So 50 is good, or a couple minutes. Okay. All right. 40. Refer to the below script and provide the explanation of the script purpose when using Scapy. So we have scan object, and scan object is going to use SR1, and so that will be send requests, right? And in that we specify IP, destination is 10.0.0.12. Our TCP is set to port 23, right? Remember when I said S port is always going to be 666, don't worry about that, but the D port is going to be 23, and then your flag is going to be S. And then for the second line, scan is going to also use send request, and then we are going to show, right, from the server. So that means that when you look at these two lines, it really means that we are going to scan port 23, which is telnet of the server 10.0.0.12, and display its response. Therefore, we use SR, right, using Scapy. SR and show. We pass show within SR1. So that means that it's going to display the response from that server, which runs telnet, that's port 23. All right, I'll hold on these in case you're still typing, and then we'll move to the next one. Any questions? So for final exam, you would see snippet of script, you know, and then it will ask for specific, and you have to choose the options that would fit for the question. Something similar to this. Okay. And I hope also reviewing also give you, you know, it highlights some of the area you can use for your project, like what Michelle been asking is she can refer to that part of the lab or the section to be able to work on the project. So it kind of go over all the things that we've covered in this class, right? It addresses all the major areas. Some areas more than others, as I have to meet the learning outcomes and in assessment for your course. Okay, for 41, it asks you to identify the protocol that is a standardized protocol used to collect and manage devices, and that will be your SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. Okay, and we dedicated a big section of a chapter on SNMP. So F would be the answer for 41. FTP is for file transfer protocol, right? TCP, we touched on TCP, DHCP, STP, ICMP. So none of those are for managing devices. So SNMP is the name. Simple Network Management Protocol allows you to do inventory of your systems, right? Check status of your system. So SNMP. For 42, what commands are used in the terminal to install SNMP on an Ubuntu server? You don't have to use sudo apt-get update, but it's always a good practice in Linux to update before you install any packages. Okay. So the important line is really the second line, sudo apt-get install SNMP. And so throughout this class, we can see that we can do everything in the terminal, right? We can write our script in the terminal using, Nano or Vim. We can, run Python in the terminal, even though set up the virtual environment in the terminal or command line. There's some packages that require, um, zip. It has zip compression, so you have to go and download it and decompress it and so on. But everything you can do on the interface, you can on the graphical user interface, you can do in terminal. Okay. And in network administration, you don't see a lot of servers that would have, except for Windows environment, that would have graphical user interface. You just mainly see terminal. You work with network appliances, it's all CLI, right? We have to be very comfortable using it. So not that you learn how to script, you know how to use the terminal more effectively in the matter of this course. For 43, what Python library is used for Python 2D plotting of graphs and histogram? There are plenty of libraries, right? If you look online, there are many libraries that you can use, but the most traditional common library would be matplotlib. Okay. And often when you do visualization of data and plotting and charting and things like that, you wanted to use, Panda with Panda and Anaconda. So that allows you to, get into the data analysis portion of the network or even data analysis in general if you're looking to do that. But for answer for 43, we would stick with the traditional common library. That will be your matplotlib. And in 44, it asks you to refer to the script and describe the output, right? So we have the first line with import, right? PLT from matplotlib, pyplot. And so then we would plot, right, the values that are specified in the list. We have two lists. The first represent the X, the second represent the Y. Then we set up the label for the first list and the second list. So X label, Y label. And then we would, we would then display using the show method. And we would use savefig to generate an image file. And this image file will be PNG. Its name is graph1. So you should have a linear inclining line graph that would represent the points for X and Y in graph1.png. So it would output graph1.png, which contains a line graph of XY given that X is 1, 5, 10, 15, and Y is 0, 2. I cut this off. Sorry, this is comma. 2, 24, 0, 2, 20, 40, 60. Okay. Any question with 44? I didn't expand too much on the plotting and the charting, right? In this particular chapter, we did some practice in the assignments. And also we expanded on talking about the library and how you would be able to run it in the lab. But these libraries are useful, especially when you're analyzing your systems, your performance, and so on. So you can chart it, graph it. There are lots of different tools. That's what's nice about Python. Libraries you can use. Okay, 45. Which Python library is a dynamic SVG charting library that produces scalable vector graphics? Format graphs easily and natively, and that will be your PyGal. Okay. So if you are looking to generate SVG format graphs, you would use PyGal. And SVG would be useful, right? It's not requiring a specific applications to open. You can open it with the browser. So it is accessible across OSs. 46. What tool is an open source web-based network monitoring and graphing tool designed as an improved front end for RRD tool that offers custom data query feature which can be used with Python, and that's your Cacti. We didn't expand too much on Cacti. However, you would know that this would be available. For 47, what tool is used to represent structural information as diagrams of abstract graphs and networks? And that will be your graph viz. We can use it to graph out our networks, right? Or even data mapping and so on. So GraphViz is a good tool to use. You can use GraphViz to create diagrams, flowcharts, and so on. Any question? Okay, getting there, okay? We're at 48, so not so bad. For 48, it asks you to refer to the script in the image and provide the command that uses graphviz dot to execute the script ex3 dot dot to generate the graph ex3 PNG. So we're given a file, which is ex3 dot dot, and in our command line, after we install GraphViz, we have to execute the command to be able to create this graph and output it into as ex3.png. And we did some practice with this, right? First, we started with dot in our assignment. Second, we did, circle and so on in the lab. So we used dot, right? And you would use the dot command, and you would then use -t PNG because we are generating PNG file. And then you would include the file name and then the -o option there. The option O is for output ex3.png. So first you have to say dot whatever file format, right? So -t PNG, your file name, your output option, and your file, your output file, your image file specification there. Okay. And then if you're using circle, then you just use circle instead of dot, right? And then the type of file format, file name, the output, file information. For 49, fill in the blank. The blank is designed to support the development of web applications, including web services, web resources, and web APIs. And that's your web framework. And we touched on the common framework using Python, right? But there are tons of other frameworks that are out there that are available for other languages. Okay. I was just teaching Ruby, a little bit of Ruby in Sonic Pi the other day for the students or the participants in the session for um, the CTE day. And I got disconnected a few times that morning because it's just so much traffic. But anyway, um, I was touching on a little bit on Ruby Rails, which is the framework for Ruby, right? And did you know that Twitch uses Ruby Rails, Airbnb uses Ruby Rail on their apps? So there are a lot of popular frameworks that are being implemented, right, for a lot of different apps. And if you're curious, if you like Python, learn Ruby. It's close, very similar. Um, you know, it uses like different methods. It has different methods and built into the library, but you're gonna see similarity in the syntax. Okay, for 50, choose the appropriate option for framework. You got Django, Flask, Tornado, Fast API, right? All the ones that we touch on in the class. And I put a tricky one in there to try to trick you. Ada is actually a web framework. It was just not in part of the discussion for this class. But there are all frameworks, web frameworks. So make sure that we know our common web frameworks. 51, what command is used to install Flask in Python virtual environment? You can do pip3 install Flask. Any questions with 49, 50, and 51? Okay. So for 52, we are going to refer to the program or the script. And we did a little bit of this in our assignment, right? So our script there have you import Flask from Flask, right? So you import Flask there. And then you have an object called app. And on line 4, that is a decorator. Okay. Let me move the thing down because the question asks you to look at the script and determine identify the decorator for the URL endpoint. And at the URL endpoint, we would have the slash right at the end. So your decorator, that will be app.route. Okay. And then in the parameter, we will pass the string or the character slash. That would be the last character for our URL endpoint. That would represent the end of the URL. So line 4 is your decorator for URL endpoint. For 53, what Python module is designed for painless debugging and interaction with API, HTTP servers, and web services? And we would refer to HTTPIE. We did a little bit of exercises on this, right? Using HTTPIE to look at requests, get, and send. From our local server. $54, fill in the blank. The blank is an extension of Flask that adds support to SQL Alchemy to an application and aims to simplify using SQL Alchemy with Flask by providing useful defaults and extra helpers that make it easier to accomplish common tasks in SQLite. And that will be your Flask SQL Alchemy. Okay, and I had you go use their tutorial and the documentation to create a database in memory, right? And then set up records in the database. And the first part of that would lead you to number 55, if you recall. So it asks you to write the script to create an in-memory only SQLite database that connect to an engine. So first you have to import create engine from SQL Alchemy, right? You have to import that in. Then after you import it, you would then declare what an object, right? That would represent the engine, and you would use create engine and specify where your database would be in SQLite. So in the second line, we have engine is, right? And here we would use create engine method that comes from SQL Alchemy library or module. And we would say that it is SQLite. And here is where you would specify the path for where you're storing that database, which is, we would say, in memory. And that would store locally to your storage. Now, if you wanted to set it for a certain server, then you have to specify, right, the IP address and host information. Okay, so that's the first step when you're building that database, is to create the engine and then connect it, right? And so on. For the final project, how many users would be in? You can do 2 or 3. That's fine. I don't need a lot of users. So for the final project, Michelle asked how many users I would require. And just do a few users is good. A couple or 3, that's fine. I just want to see if you know how to be able to make it. Yep, you're welcome. Okay, 56. Which of the following option is an SDK for Python to create, configure, and manage AWS services such as in EC2 and S3? So that's going to be your Model 3. Okay. None of the other ones actually exist. So A for 56. For 57, when setting up AWS infrastructure, what needs to reside entirely on one region? On a region, you need to make sure that a virtual private cloud, your VPC, needs to reside in one entire region. Okay. And we did exercises where we establish your VPC. Okay. We also have your instances, connecting and remote into your instances. Okay. And then we use AWS CLI to be able to manage, right, your services through its commands. For 58, when setting up AWS infrastructure, how many subnets can reside on one AZ? And that's one subnet per AZ. And it talks about available zones and why we would consider the physical zones that would service our customers in the region. It's important that we would consider the region and the zones accordingly to your targeted customers or clients. Any question with AWS for question 56 through 58? I had left my virtual machine on Azure because remember how I showed you how I set up ELK to manage Azure, and I forgot even when I stopped the virtual machine, Azure bill, well, it subtracted like $10 over the last few days, so I have to deallocate the virtual machine yesterday or this morning. Um, so I'm down to like $185. But even if I left it on for the majority of the week, right? More than a week, I think. So as you can see, right, that's using multiple services on Azure. So anyway, 59. In AWS, which of the following option is a customizable network that allows customers to define their own IP address range, add, delete subnets, create routes, add VPN gateways, associate security policies, connect EC2 instance, and so much more, right? That will be your virtual, right? Your VPC. We touched on VPC earlier, why it needs to be on one of the region. And then you can also establish connection across between two VPCs by using VPC peering, which is question 60. So question 60 asks, in AWS, what type of connection is established between two VPCs to route traffic between them using private IPv4 addresses or IPv6 addresses? And that's VPC peering. Okay. For 61, in AWS, which the following option is a stateful virtual firewall that controls inbound and outbound access to resources, and that's your security group, right? And to start off in your instance in EC2, for example, you might not have any kind of filter happening with your default security group. But when you establish that, you can specify on how your systems, your instance, your servers would have access, would be accessible based on the rules that you set for what's incoming and what's outgoing using security group. Okay. And then 62, true or false. In AWS, ACL support both allow and deny rules. And in the notes in the chapter, it touches on the difference between security group and ACLs, and ACL supports both deny and allow rules. So we're able to block and permit at the same time, right? But rule of thumbs in security, I think in general, is that it's a lot easier to control what's permitted compared to what should be blocked. Because if you're looking at like a Venn diagram, right? Permit would be your what is included, right? Your group, your security group. And then if you're trying to block, it will be the universe, because it will be everything that's outside of that. And that's always changing. So because if you're blocking from one source, and that can change, the next day or the next second, as if attack when we look at attackers, they can frequently use different type of system via taking over, like using botnets or using zombies and so on. So it's a lot easier to manage traffic if you permit it, right? You would whitelist it. You would have a list of what you allow versus what's allowed and denied. But in some cases, we would also deny. And when you're looking at like applications or application firewall, you would see that they would have both, because you would then allow specific ones and then you can set up to reject all, uh, deny all, or deny specific, sources. So if I'm running web application firewall, I would say, okay, I would monitor and I would reject all the sources, for example, from Russia or China and so on. Okay, for 62, true or false, we touch on that one. 63, in AWS, what type of elastic load balancer handles web traffic via HTTP and HTTPS? And that will be your application load balancer. And there's a small section that talks about using load balancer on AWS, different type of load balancer. There were two types, right? The network and the application load balancer. So the application is really geared for web-based traffic, and the network is for everything else that would relate to the network. Okay. And that comes equipped with AWS services. For 64, which of the following items are required before using DNS for load balancer? If you're using DNS for load balancer, you need to have first a load balancer in each of the intended region. So the region that you're trying to load balance, you have in the region that's in use, you have to have load balance. And then registered domain name, because that ties to your DNS. And we do not need Route 53 in the registration of the domain, but we do need Route 53 in the DNS service. Okay, so after you register, you would then need Route 53 to establish the DNS service. And then in question 65, what type of AWS service is used to reduce latency of content delivery by physically serving the content closer to the customer? And that will be your CloudFront CDN. Okay. 66, in Azure, what type of service component allows the user to deploy, manage, and maintain OS and server software instance types, providing combinations of CPU or RAM? And that will be considered virtual servers, which entails, right, virtual server, virtual machines, really. Okay, but Microsoft classified them as virtual servers. So if you take cloud certification like Azure Essentials or Fundamentals for Microsoft, right, make sure that you know the terminology that Microsoft refers to or how they name things. Just like AWS is the same. They would certify specifically for their services and things that the terminology that they use for the cloud environment. For 67, in Azure CLI, what command is used to initially receive access token for the authenticate user? You would use AZ for Azure, right? Login. And before you use that, you have to install Azure ACL or CLI, I'm sorry, CLI. So for For 68, in Azure, what service is used to extend VNet to other Azure services over the direct connection, which allows traffic from the VNet to Azure service to remain on the Azure network, and you would use VNet endpoint service. Okay. VNet endpoint service. For 69, what commands are used in Azure CLI to create inbound rules under lab NSG for CIS30B resource to allow SSH connection? And I know we did this in the assignment, right? We created two set of rules, one for SSH and one for SSL. So to start, you would need to specify that you're using Azure by doing AZ network. So AZ network, and then NSG is for your security group, your network security group. Then we would create and we would specify the resource 30B and our lab NSG name. So we would say name is that's -n, the option N is going to be lab NSG. And if you don't know, you can request help, which gives you a lot of different things, but you can get help in each of the specific type of command as well. So after we created, then we would set up the rules. So we would then use AZ network again, NSG rule, create, right? Basically, we're creating the rule in the resource CIS30B with the name NSG, lab NSG. Now it's going to have a new rule to allow SSH. And we talked about the priority level, right? The lower the number, the higher the priority, starting with 100 and it goes up to, I believe, 6,000. Okay. So here we would have the priority 150. So it's pretty high in priority. And then to continue that, we would have a direction inbound. That will be everything from prefixes that will be internet. Then your destination, that will be the port ranges. And we would refer to the port number for SSH, which is 22. And we would specify that it is access allow right here. And then after that, we would include the protocol. And if we want to add the description, we would say description permit SSH inbound. Otherwise, you will not know what that rule is for, right? So we wanted to make sure that we put in a little bit of description to say that this is for inbound. And then you can also set up outbound rule and so on. So on this one, we're only doing SSH. And then for question 70, what is used to encrypt the traffic between a VNet and on-premises network and remote clients? That will be your VPN gateway. Okay. So in following in the Azure chapter, we touch on different type of services, the CLI, Azure CLI commands, and then we also talk about VPN Gateway, how that would be used, right, to protect traffic when you have clients that are connecting to your networks on Azure remotely. So for 71, what is used to use as a distributed search in analytics engine in ELK or Elasticstack, right? That is your Elasticsearch. So ELK stands for three main components in Elasticstack: your Elasticsearch, your Logstash, and your Kibana, right? Those are the three main components that are commonly used, right, for data analysis. And it doesn't have to be just for networks, but it is used for cloud data analysis. Okay. It can be incorporated with another cloud service or cloud provider like Azure. So for 72, in Elasticstack, what is used to facilitate collecting, aggregating, and enriching data and storing it in the search repository. That will be Logstash and Beats. So Elastic Beats can be used to collect data, right, and aggregate data. Logstash would do the same. And then 73, when using Logstash in Elasticstack, what provides many options in input, filter, and output? Your configuration file in Logstash. So Logstash configuration file would specify the input, the filter, and the output. Any question regarding ELK? And then 74 in Elasticstack, what is used to provide data visualization with charts and graphs in Elasticsearch. The main common component is Kibana, but in your notes in your chapter, it talks about Grafana, which is another module. There are so many different projects under ELK, right? But Kibana is commonly used at it would provide you the very simple, data visualization component, graphs, charts from the index that you obtain, right? By setting up your Elasticsearch and your Beats. Okay. But Grafana is also another option if you wanted to incorporate graphs. That's different than Kibana. And lastly, 75, fill in the blank. The blank is a single purpose data shippers. Or our single purpose data shippers usually install as agent that collect data on the host and send output data either directly to Elasticsearch or Logstash for further processing. So it automates that for you and it uses Elastic Beats. Okay. So Elastic Beats would be the option if you don't use Logstash. It can be forwarded to Logstash or Elasticsearch. And in the chapter and the notes and in our assignments, right, we address some of these areas and how it's used and what's required in setting these up. Okay. Any question? If you're interested in ELK, you can use the trial version for 30 days, as I mentioned. It works seamlessly with Azure. I haven't played with it with AWS, but I was authenticating to Azure when I set that up and it sees it, and I activated my instance, my virtual machine on it, and it works fine. Okay. All right. That concludes my 75 questions review. You have any questions?
Could you show 1 through 18, please? I came in late.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Could you show 1 through 18, please? I came in late.
Okay. All right, no problem. So we'll come back to the beginning.
Slow scroll. Oh, it's fine. I'm recording it.
All right. So if you didn't get the first few, I'm just going to scroll down. And then you can always go back to the video and play them too when I post it.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Any other questions or anything else you need?
We have class Wednesday.
No class on Wednesday. I'm here. However, if you have questions about project, anything, assignments, you can pop in. No class next Monday because we cover all the review today. So again, I will be available during class time or office hours too, if you want to show up there, in case you have questions. Okay, if you want to just hit me with Canvas messages and email, that's fine too. Okay, and then Thursday, week 15, we will not have any hold session, but I am available to meet if you wanted to schedule appointments. And so, but make sure that we work on our projects and, look over your final review. And then if anything outstanding that you miss, if it's locked, make sure that you contact me so I can extend the availability date. Or if you still want to submit, and I will get your grades updated before the final. I'm going to work on that this week. Okay. Any questions? Okay, let me stop recording.